Hi, Alex.
Hi, Sergey.
Yeah, it's very fortunate to have you on this podcast. Normally, many people in Berlin follow you for precise predictions, and this is why I'm a little bit of afraid to have this talk because you predict really interesting things. And just reading out of your last podcast and the blog post on LinkedIn, uh, the dark ages are awaiting us. So let's like linger on this topic and explore doom scenario for us and for society, in the dark age.
All right. Well, the article that I wrote was rather asking whether we're facing currently an exponential age or, let's say, call it dark ages. And I think the idea of exponential age is getting a lot of attention currently in the media. We're seeing, especially in the AI space, we're seeing how fast the development has become. And so it calls a lot of excitement that we will be able to do a lot of stuff and improve our quality of life tremendously. So I think this is what is called exponential age. On the other hand, and I look at the situation as an economist. So I'm less a technical nature saying how the AI actually works, but rather I look at the cycles and whether the projections that are currently being made for the AI are sustainable going forward. And in my view, we have a lot of stuff that we need to pay attention to, and I'm more critical about the curve, how the implementation and adoption of AI technology is going to happen. So, first of all, what we need to understand, and that's what I'm looking at, is that according to the technical wave cycles, we are about to enter in the sixth technological wave. We can call it Kondratiev curves, or Mr. Schwab also calls it the new technological sixth technological wave. And the integral part of the sixth technological wave is definitely in AI. And we see AI that will take over a lot of functions, especially in production, in legal system, assisting humans in making processes better, especially in manufacturing. So we're going to have an additive manufacturing practices. We'll need to transition to a new energy phase because the new technological wave will require enormous amounts of energy. We will have a layer of basically crypto and blockchain infrastructure that will allow the robots and the AI to execute the transactions. And we will need to come up with a new management system of this complex society, right? So basically, we are heading now AI, energy, and data that will allow us a layer of basically base layer and infrastructure layer. Then we'll top on robots on it, right? So that will be more production layer, a robot taxis or whatever you call it. And then you call it a value layer where you can make transactions, transfer value. This is more like blockchain and crypto stuff. So this is where we transition. And in order, of course, to start this transition, we all need to have an energy security. And the problem is, if we look historically to the previous five technological waves, every time from one wave to another, we have at least a double amount of energy that we not only require, but we also use. So we started with the wood, then we moved to coal, then we moved to oil, then we moved to oil and gas. And then in the fifth phase, that was actually planned that we'll move to nuclear in a big, big way. After Chernobyl, it's actually spooked the whole idea. And if we look at the density energy, right? So the nuclear energy is the most dense form of energy we have. And it was highly unfortunate that after Chernobyl, a lot of research efforts were put on hold. So we basically lost a lot of time. And the fifth technological wave that we currently have is actually not fully complete. And for the new technological wave to evolve, we need massive amounts of energy because there is a prediction that says that in order to feed the AI models, we probably need as much energy as Earth is currently consuming. So the question is where this amount of energy is going to come from. And we have multiple sources. So we can hit on nuclear with a double, triple speed, it's quite risky because you need to make sure that the new nuclear reactors are secure. There is a technology. It's like there is a technology that makes a circuit-based nuclear reactors that don't produce any waste. They're not tested yet in high volume, but this technology exists. So we need time for transition. And the second phase is basically we say we're going to get green energy. And the argument is that when we manage to use the photovoltaic or the wind energy sources and put it on AI, then we'll create a feedback loop, right? So the AI will create efficiency in terms of management, in terms of load of the system. We can predict the systemic stuff, so we will be allowed not to lose a lot of energy. So it's going to be great, right? So if the current projections that around 2020, the cost of producing 1 kWh of solar energy was cheaper than anything else, right? But the problem with this, it's the cheapest stuff is one thing. The problem is that green energy is the density of this energy source is very, very small. So the problem, and I give an example why the green energy transition is a pretty long shot. I don't believe in it because if you looked at the International Space Station, it's like a small capsule, right? And then you take and look at the solar panels that it has. They're huge. And they exist in vacuum. They have a perfect angle towards sun, so they feed the optimal amount of energy per unit. If we say we are both in Berlin, if we say we want to feed this 4 million, and I mean in this space station, there is nothing. There is a bit research doing. There's no heating. There is no manufacturing. There's nothing there. So if we imagine that you need to supply a city like Berlin with full of energy for all its purposes, the amount of land you need for that is simply enormous. It's one thing. And the second thing, in order to build all these solar panels, the amount of resources that we require is also enormous. And then we need to look at the bottleneck that basically the sole key keeper or gatekeeper in the green transition is China. 90% of all green energy supply chains is in China. So everything, the dependence on China is so enormous. Then we have, and then you ask yourself, okay, even if the source of the energy is very cheap, we have problem with critical resource materials. We have huge dependency on one country. In this geopolitical situation that we're currently in, it's not really reliable to say, oh, hooray, it's going to go super smoothly. So we have loads of risks. We have an enormous amount of energy that we need, and we are unable to produce it in the way that we see fit. Because currently, everything that we talk about tonight, I will finish, is we will continue to live in a globalized world. And this is just not going to happen. The supply chains will be localized, and the additive manufacturing and AI are exactly thought to do this, to complete this process. Closed circuit manufacturing without any waste, close to the location, but it's not going to be in global ways, in a global world. The global world is over. There's nothing there. We're going to be fractioning in the next couple of centuries, not centuries, probably decades. So there is a lot of economic disruption coming towards us. And for me, the exponential age is premature. It will come, but it will come after 2 or 3 decades of pretty much economic decline that's going to be comparable to what we witnessed in the Soviet Union in the 90s.
And just, to play devil's advocate, and you downloaded quite a lot of information, and I, every topic that you've mentioned could be expanded to yet another kind of podcast. And I would love to just comment a few news that we had recently in Berlin or in a German news. So the first one that sparked my smile is a huge celebration at Brandenburger Tor when the last power plant was scheduled to be decommissioned. So suddenly all the green parties were calling up for a celebration. There was a lot of like, almost like a parties going on in Brandon Mugatua. And I was like, dude, like, what are we celebrating? The end of technology or the end of this, a last option for Germany to be, to actually to continue researching this um, possibility to actually enter the sixth wave of technological advancement, as you mentioned. And the second news came from Czech Republic, because during Easter they had pretty sunny weather, and suddenly all the photovoltaic they produce over, like enormous amount of power. The grid couldn't sustain that, and they didn't have um, storage capacity for all this extra green power. So what they decided to do to shut it down, so that they cut off the grid all the um, these fields of photovoltaic panels. So these two stories kind of raise a red flag for me after I read your blog post. So if you were reading this and like talking to me, what should we do to actually prevent this stupidity and actually move forward and start gradual evolvement to this possibility to have this sixth wave of innovation?
I think we can't. I think the idea behind the Dark Ages is that what we usually have, right? We have a phase of huge technological expansion usually. So if we look for the last couple of 100 years, the humanity has improved immensely. So we pulled like millions and millions out of poverty. We created global economy that benefited. Probably now it's in its ugly form, that now we have a huge concentration of capital. But overall, if we say that the last 100, 150 years were extremely successful for humankind. The problem with this is that everything goes in cycles. So, as they say, bad times give birth to strong leaders. Strong leaders give birth to good times, and good times give birth to bad leaders. So we're now good times giving birth to bad leaders is exactly the situation we see. And the problem is that our administrative setup, right? So how we manage the economy is simply outpaced by the technological development. So the technology moves so fast that we are unable to create normal and good technological regulations, and actually not only regulations, as a society to find out which bodies do we need to control and how we control the negative effect of this progress moving forward that is actually beneficial to the society or a country, whatever you call it, as a whole. We are unable to do that because the interest of, let's say, people working on the government side, they, first of all, they're not up to date. Second of all, they're not incentivized to take risk and implement new structures because they can lose their job. So basically, technology moves ahead, and everything that's happening currently is basically has a prohibitive character. So if we look like at currency, right? So cryptocurrencies. The whole idea about what happened in the fifth wave and now moving into sixth wave is that basically internet has opened a vast amount of information. We as a people became transparent. So everyone knows what we do, like Facebook or Google. They can track us, they can sell us advertising suited for us. Then we got a biosensors. So our body has become transparent as well. So now the government that has access to this information basically knows how we behave and how do we feel and what's in our bodies. The logical step would be to say we need a protection of our data because it's in constitution and actually in civil interest as a whole, so we can function as a society. But what we're facing now, before we were able to create a layer, let's say a crypto layer, how we can encrypt our identity and save this whole discussion about that data protection. It could have been solved through a crypto layer in one way or another. Web3 is now currently trying to do that, but still what we are facing in every single biggest economy, a huge opposition. They try to prohibit it. So we're basically losing control of this decentralized access to our own data. And we're moving toward the China model where the state control of internet, where the state control what is allowed to be done, moves us toward this society controlled by the state, which is actually very concerning because AI can actually exacerbate this development and speed it up. So we face basically what we're facing now, the increased control of the state, which is by its definition is going to be oppressive, because if you cannot handle the change, you're going to try to stabilize your power through exactly this mechanism, oppression. You're going to silence this, you're going to allow this, you're going to allow that, but you're going to try through oppression, try to keep your society intact. This is basically what Chinese doing, and the whole world is actually moving into. And this is a bit scary, but the problem is that we need to clean up every administrative setup or management setup that we currently have. We need to change our paradigm, how we think about the economy, capitalism, because in a world that has a limited amount of resources, economic model of constant growth, which is currently our prevalent economic growth model, we need to grow more and more and more, is simply impossible, because the constant growth is by definition exponential. And you cannot have exponential growth on a planet with limited resources. And we actually screwed up the idea that we can expand our human civilization into space. Because the problem what we're currently facing, every dark ages comes with the end of, let's say, globalization or expansion phase. In the 13th century in Europe, it was basically Eurasia region that was explored, and we had 100 years of crisis before Portuguese and Spanish basically expanded and found out that there is a US and both Americas. So that allowed additional space to expansion, because when the economic cake is expanding, everyone is basically benefiting from it. Now we live in a world, after the blow up of the great financial crisis in 2008, we live in a world that is not growing anymore, because the whole planet is explored. We know everything. So there is no potential for economic expansion on this world, and we need to expand the frontier. The illogical frontier would be to say, let's go to space. But we lack the technologies. Basically, Musk is trying to speed it up, but we lost 20, 30 years. So we are now, because of that, if the pie is not growing, you're going to have a lot of economic interest that we need to fight for. And basically, what we see, a large amount of conflicts, and I mean, the war in Ukraine is exemplary how it's going to proceed. We're going to see more and more wars, because big countries need to fight for a bigger piece of pie that is not growing. And this is basically what we're facing currently.
And let me just push you back, because I really love your concept, and I would like to have cons and pros of this path to go forward. So if I just roll it back a little bit and I say, okay, how about our biggest and most effective blockchain network, Ethereum, is now operating on a proof of stake, so it doesn't consume a lot of energy. So we kind of we manage to stay away from energy consumption with ways to basically mitigate that risk. Or there are concepts, for example, to fight this global domination of states by a concept of network state. It's been circling around and giving power back to people, and also using blockchain technology to leverage that. Also, we see a massive progress in fusion technology. It's still not in production, but some of the biggest names are quite bullish and investing in this sector. And as a financial advisor, you would be surprised that already right now, if I go to Nasdaq, I could invest already in 7 stocks that claim to be leaders in fusion technology. So I know it's still in the stealth mode development, but what if this happens this year or next year? Are we going to be saved from doomsday scenario, and kill this dark age, or you believe it's still inevitable?
The thing, I don't think it's nothing is impossible, because what we're going to see, so the concept is that if the transition to new energy sources with the help of AI will definitely is going to be speeding up, because we're going to unlock huge amount of information that are currently not accessible, and we're going to find new ways. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying the transition period, because like with the nuclear energy, I mean, the development of fusion technology is going to take time. Even if you have the technology, you need to build it. You need to build prototype. You need to run through it. You need to really work through it, because the risks, if something blows up, are so enormous. So basically, you're going to need like 3, 5, 6 years. Then you need additional period where you're going to roll it out. Then you need to create enough capacity to produce this technology in mass. So we are talking about a very long period of time where this technology can be scaled up. And we don't even know how effective it is, because I mean, I'm not 40% of the Nasdaq companies are La La Land, the company that never earn money, the company that sells something, but we don't even know whether going to be achievable or not. So if we're going to manage it, it's great. But I think it's just the timing that is our problem currently. The whole stuff that happened with the green energy transition is that we started transitioning from the well-developed and energy source with pretty good, let me put, gas is pretty clean, actually, if you compare it to green energy, because green energy produces, if you take everything, all the costs that are incorporated, and I mean the mining cost, the manufacturing cost of these panels and wind turbines, and then impact on the nature, the cleanest energy on earth is nuclear energy. So we said, okay, we don't need it, right? Now we need a new source of energy. We might transition to it, but because of this green energy transition by itself, the amount of the resources that we require, and this is not only for energy sources, it's for electrical vehicles, for new turbines, for new photovoltaic and plants, it's huge. But for the last 30 years, we politically said we are not going to invest in dirty businesses. So we didn't invest in oil, we didn't invest in mining exploration. And now we face when we need to quickly transition to an energy source that is highly unstable. As you said, in Prague, they don't know what to do. Let's cut it off. This is bullshit, because you lose a lot of energy. And we've tried to transition from very secure sources. We stopped investing money in it and said, okay, we don't need it. And we're going to transition to a new source that we don't have any experience with on a scale. And now, when we see that it's not working, we're going to transition to even new source of energy that is not tested at all. So I think the problem is here is just the path going forward and the time that we'll need. So I think in this current economic environment, the energy reliance is going to be huge. So every single region or country is going to require as much energy as possible, and this is basically what we see. I think what we are heading in terms of economics, it's going to be a split of the world in macro regions. So we're going to have prevailing powers of countries that are going to control certain regions with resources and all this stuff to make an autark economies. So you don't, yeah.
Yeah, and this is exactly what I wanted to stay with, and kind of roll it out to second part of discussion. I love how you describe that. So basically, if somebody who would jump in and start reading your blog, you lay it out very systematically. You name it as like a global cluster. So a couple of countries grouping together in order to survive, basically. And this leads to different economic involvements. This is what we see right now a lot in the press with the taglines de-dollarization or something like that. So basically, yeah, the global shift from unit of exchange of having in American dollars to yuans and etc. And to start off, I just want to mention one of my family members. His name is Dieter, and he has a house in the middle of nowhere in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, fully covered with photovoltaic, with a source of water, big storage batteries everywhere. So he decided to be fully off the grid. And I was at the beginning laughing at him, and everyone else was not really conveying with his idea. But with the time, I could clearly see what he did was making sense. And what you describe is basically being energy independent, what probably would also mean at scale for each country. So let's linger a little bit on that topic where you could, show out the scenarios that await us.
Okay, so I mean, energy, everything we have in this world is basically transformed form of energy, right? So whatever you take, even our life, because we need food, in order to grow food, we need energy and so on and so on. I mean, we are now entering into a phase of very expensive energy. And I'm not talking about dollars. I'm talking about how much energy do we use to extract a unit of energy. And if we look at oil, if we look at other energy sources, it becomes increasingly expensive to extract the sources of energy, meaning that we spend a lot of amount of energy on extraction itself. So we're not living in a world of energy abundance. At the same time, we have still a growing world population, right? So the projections that the fossil fuels consumption, it will still increase over the next 10 years because of the increased consumption in the emerging markets, especially in Eastern Asia, India, because the population is basically so young. So what we're now facing is that, okay, if your energy, if we live in a world of huge geopolitical tensions, which we currently have, and I mean, there is a war, Russia with the West. We have a potential war of China with the West. We have different conflicts actually around the world going, smaller conflicts. But we, as a matter of fact, we live in a world of huge geopolitical tensions, right? So the energy independence becomes crucial, because if I cut you off of energy, you're done, basically. So we have basically, if you look at the regions, economists say that you need at least 500 million people in your country or your region or whatever you call it, in order to become technologically and economically autark. So you're not dependent on any other global supply chains, because what we actually have, right? We had a globalization phase was all about effectiveness. We created a very effective, cost-efficient global supply chains that when COVID struck, it just fell apart. So we're now facing that every big country, every big economy needs to self-preserve. They know if something happens and if this thing's going to get worse, we need to have this and this and this back at our home. So we're facing insource of the production, all right? If I insource my own production, then of course it's going to be inflationary, and I'm going to have a lot of problems with financial system, which is basically what we see now, because the globalization was also driven by huge amounts of debt. If we look at the debt levels in the world currently, they're just astonishing. So basically, what we now have, when we need to create a transition, when we need to invest actually in innovations, not in DoorDashes or Ubers, we need to create new energy sources, we need to create new medical stuff to sink the cost of medicine in the West. We need huge amounts of money, and we need the results now, and we're just lacking the time again here. So this alleviates and this creates chaos in the systems. And as we talked administratively, we are not prepared for this huge destabilization. On top, we have a technological progress with ChatGPTs and all that basically drives people crazy. And we come in extremely unstable position in the world. And in the world that doesn't grow and extremely unstable, what's going to happen? Increased confrontation. And confrontation is going to be around, first of all, resources, because green energy transition is going to be there. It's basically a politically driven event that we need clean energy. I don't have anything against that, because obviously if we have a closed circuit economy, we don't produce waste, it's great. Who's against that? But it's the path and at the time that we need for this transition. It's the alignment of interest that is definitely not there. because everything in this world is used as political weapon. You cannot have an agreement on anything, basically. You see it now. And now we're facing, okay, in this scenario, it's basically unavoidable that we're gonna be splintering. And the countries with good energy supplies are going to be proliferating because they're going to be able to use this energy to, if they're done right, of course, to implement new technologies, to supercharge the development of AI, because new technologies are very energy intensive. And if you don't have the energy, you're going to lack in this economic development for the next stage. So we are basically going to see concentration, let's say, I'll put it like Arab, Iran, Russian, Central Asia region, because they're probably going to come around 600, 700 million people, very young population. You have China with 1.5 billion, you have India with 1.5 billion. Probably you're going to get something in the Southeast Asia, growing population. You have definitely US. The only loser in this whole picture is basically Europe, because it doesn't have any energy and it doesn't have any political power, because the leaders in Europe, they cannot decide anything. We're basically clowns, and it's like really astonishing to look what the German politicians do, what European politicians do, and how the European Union, in my opinion, is going to fraction, because there's no possibility to align the interest in going forward. But I'm running too far.
Yeah, Alex, like in the Western world, we've been living with this belief that the biggest resources every country should fight for is actually people or taxpayers, because this is how our economy function. With losing or brain drain, you're never going to get anywhere. And like America was fighting for brains for a long time, until now they are winning this brain war. And the resources that you described that countries will fight for, we still in this conversation describe as mineral resources, land resources. But also, like in my belief, we were talking that land war was not making any sense, at least economically. And I honestly, I couldn't believe that Russia would ever make the stupidity to start the war in Ukraine, because land doesn't mean anything. Like, how you exploit the land or what technology you're going to bring or market size of people, it's a different story. But what they start, to me, is economical disaster. Yet still it happens. And I, just to linger upon that a little bit more, I had a guest on my previous podcast, and he described this the same way you did, this economic, political, and ethical tensions in every country. And what we see right now in Ukraine is basically just like a spark, like a spark before
it's the first leg, right?
Before they could go. And how do we prevent this? How can we make sure that we don't have any sparks? Like, do you believe this transition is possible without blood on streets?
No, I think it's inevitable, and I think for me the question is whether we're going to have a big war or not. And basically, for me, it's about China and the US. I think everyone knows that we have a collision between two superpowers. I mean, the US, if you look at the political situation there, the decaying situation is pretty obvious. Whether the China model is better, I doubt it. I don't think you want to live in a society that is run the way the Chinese society is done. But we need to be mindful of it, because especially if we look like at the technological level, right? Because the idea how we think about technological development in the West and in China is completely different. Because if we look like at robotics, automation in the West, it's kind of like we look at them and say these are the economic actors, or like put them like these are electronic or robot slaves that we use for our economic interest in a decentralized capitalistic system. In China, it's a bit different because it's more hierarchical, so you need more control. And this technology is basically more used to provide more stability to this hierarchy, which is by itself, basically, then we go to the state, to other states, the autocratic states, and they say, China, please export your technology to us. We want to control our people, blah, 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 blah. So this idea, right? So we have two different views of the world, how it should be structured. And it's interestingly, the Japanese actually have also made it like 30-year 30-year projections, and they treat robots, because of the bad demography, they treat robots as kind of like a society members, and they actually philosophize about how whether robots should have voting rights or not. So it's again a completely different path the Japanese are thinking about. So I think if the my biggest fear is that with the rising tensions, the inclination to use the Chinese model will become more and more apparent, because in the world, when the world is fractioning, and let's say every single person at power will do whatever it takes to keep that power, we will have more restrictive use of this technology against civil and human rights. So I think this is pretty big risk at the current stage.
And but like to push back with also interesting data that I got from your podcast. So Giovanni Aringi's cycles, they also describe domination of like ethical or countries throughout the history, and they were transitioned from Genova state to Dutch state, and then from Dutch to British colony or British Empire.
Yeah.
But I'm not a historian. Like probably I'm wrong about that. But I don't remember pretty bloody conflicts between Dutch Empire or Dutch Kingdom and Genova. Back then it was the trader leagues that we call now Italy, I guess, or the wars between Britain or British Empire and Dutch. They were only naval conflicts. At least I haven't. But maybe somebody knows more history than me.
I think it's a bit different concept, because in this domination phase, it's not about one country fighting another, because Europe was basically after, like in the 15th century, when the formation of national states became a feature, not a bug. Then there were like wars all over Europe all the time taking place. So the whole peak of this development was basically the First World War, right? It made no economic sense, but still everyone participated in it. If you look at transitions, so basically probably the Crimean War in 19th century helped UK to establish its domination for additional 100 years. I think the cycles are not clear. Yes, Arrighi's cycle said, okay, there's always phase domination, and now in 2030s we're going to face a big stage up between US and China. If so, yes, but until then, the transition will go through a lot of local conflicts. So basically, these two superpowers will prepare for big conflict, and then everyone else is going to be participating in what's coming next. Because if we think, and I'm just thinking out loud, right, what's going to be the next stage of the world order? If we think we're going to have any potential, let's say, global construction, so we'll have to live with each other. One way would be like Orwell. So we have three blocks and we fight each other, and there's like only propaganda and people are poor. Then there are elites that are doing good, and the rest is going to be like slaves. So basically, more or less, Mr. Schwab's idea of inclusive capitalism. The second idea would say, okay, if we look at the current hierarchy of the economic order, right? So we have the US as a hegemon. Then we have the Western countries as like the second layer that actually incorporated into this economic system that is basically based on the banking system controlling and expanding credit, and being a mechanism of control for all other countries. So the emerging markets, and I urge your listeners to read a book called Kleptopia by Tim Burgess. It describes how actually the Swiss banking system was used to control the national funds of Kazakhstan. It's a very fascinating story, and I think it's not just Kazakhstan; it's all over the world. What you do is you go into the country, you corrupt a small minority of elites, you bring the money back into the West and control the money in the banking system. So you always have a lever towards what the country is doing, especially if it's resource rich. So we now have a hierarchy. Okay, we have US, the Western countries, and the rest of the world that is to a certain extent controlled or not controlled by this banking syndicate. So if we look into the next stage, and let's just think out loud what's going to be in the next stage in terms of how the world is going to look. If we transition to a phase of let's call it kind of like Matrix, right? So we have a fusion between virtual world and real world, and it's kind of like Meta, Web3, virtual reality. It's being pushed a lot, and I mean with AI, it's going to be the speed is going to take huge dimensions. So if we move to that, idea that the world is going that direction, the superpower, one or two, I'm not saying it's going to be unipolar or multipolar, the superpowers that will control the technology of the VR, of the interaction, or that will have access and patents on the AI algorithm, will be the sitting on top. So the second layer will be everyone else who provides resources and, let's say, produces physical interface or virtual interface for this matrix economy. And the rest is just a gray zone. It's just probably a lot of resource countries that are going to be like, as basically kind of like Africa nowadays. So it's a playing field that everyone can do whatever they want. I think in that transition, basically the only thing that changes to the current state of the world is what is the key mechanism that controls and gives you the most rent or the value added. How do you capture the most value added of the system, of the new economic system? Is that you control the most crucial technologies and basically sell them out for someone to produce. Right? So I think in that direction, if we move in that direction, we can get a completely different dynamic. But this is kind of nice about this world that the tensions will definitely lead to certain, I think the next 10, 20 years is going to be really, really hard, because we don't forget, we need to blow up this financial bubble that we have built over the last 40 years. It needs to go away in order to start new cycle of economic life. It needs to go away, and until we have done that, I think to project an exponential age and everything's going to be great, I think it's very premature and very very dangerous, to be honest.
Few people would say, like, what financial bubble? I'm living from salary to salary. What are you talking about? But anyways, like that's a joke. But let me ask you this simple question: that not being an economist, I was probably living in the idealistic world, and you could help me to reveal this truth about the order of the world we might be living in. So I've been confronted a lot with this idea that the world might be a representation of two different tax systems. So the one system that we live in the West is a liberty system where you allow economic unit to evolve, and then you tax that unit by amount of added value that unit produces. So it could be a human or a company. So that way you split resources among many, 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 many units and then milk them. So this is one way. The other way is like Eastern world, or like I could simplify it to say Russian world, where you have already resources given by the state, and then humans only need to operate that, but the majority of resources already belong to the country, and they decide how to divide it, and I don't know, gain it, sell it, whatever. So it's two different systems, and I was actually hoping that if we continue development in this direction, then this Western idea, or how we popularize it and call it democracy, could simply gain more tractions and attract more talents and get more people, and we could still have this idealistic state where we live, produce, add more value to the system, basically like how Europe started, or like ideas of European Union. Am I right in my assumptions, or I'm like missing something?
They are pretty idealistic, to be honest. Listen, if we look, I don't think it's that. I understand the argument. I don't think the argument. I think the difference between those two states is not that big, because usually the resources, even if though they actually might belong to the state, they're being exploited by a small minority of people and actually private companies. That then the question who gets the cash flows, and it's not the state, it's not the people actually. So, but at the end of the day, you tax the same amount. So in one system, you tax a broad amount of people. In the other system, you tax actually a very small amount of people that get huge profits, right? So I think the problem is when we think about money is that the taxation is just a mechanism or of incentivation for people to do something. Because if I give you, I don't know, if I give you my let's say my pencil, right? And I say it's kind of like a money. It's not going to be money at all because I say it so. But if you can pay your taxes with this pencil, it's going to be automatically money, because you have to pay taxes in order to be able to live in a certain state in a current society, right? And in order to pay that, there is a certain element with what you can pay this. Usually it's a fiat currencies currently, right? So actually, if we look at the logic, the money first needs to be created in order to tax to be paid. So the state has to be, usually we'd call it, the state has to print money to give it to people. People then go to work, then create additional economic value, then pay taxes, right? So this is the logic that actually this modern monetary theory, currently so popular, is proposing. But it's actually the way it works. The only problem is that the money is not being created by the government. It's being created by the banking system. And it's actually that the money, as we think of them as some fiat currency that, or some notes that we hold in the hand, cash, amount of cash in the system is less than 1%. Everything else is basically an accounting on the balance sheets of the banks. And 95% is actually the study that was done by Bank of England. It says that 95% of the money is being created by the private banking sector. Private banking sector. Every dollar that is being created is by definition an extension of credit in the system, right? So everything is built on debt. And if you don't create enough debt, you cannot create economic growth. Because what
Alex, sorry, is it 95%? Is it in nowadays, or it's been like a standard that we had before?
No.
What is the healthy number? Like, because money creation is a healthy mechanism to actually have this supply and demand for monetary system. But
the problem, no one knows.
To me, 95 is like a lot, right?
I think it's probably figure on the lower end. I think it's probably even higher. But the thing is that none of the current economists can define what money is. It's kind of like discussion that the US has. Tell me what is a woman. Basically, I can ask the same question, tell me what is a money, and no one can define it because it's so complicated, because banks use various techniques to create money and manage their balance sheet. And we actually don't see it, because if you look at let me put it that way. If you look at the financial system as a whole, right? So we put central banks, we put banks, and we put non-banking financial institutions. So we'll probably end up around $470 trillion in assets. The global economy is about 90 trillion. So we have like financial assets towards our global GDP is probably like 6 times, something like that. So the classical banking system, or the assets of the banking systems, are probably around 200 trillion. The shadow banking system, it is not a bank. You don't see it. It's not regulated. It's hedge funds like insurances and all stuff. It's 250. It's bigger than the banking system. And the overall size of all central banks in the world is around 40 trillion. So we have an economy of like central banks, economy that is 10 times larger as the central bank. Central banks don't play any role in this. Apart from let's say, psychological, they don't play any role in this. They try to control our perception of how the markets work, but we don't know how actually the system works. It's too complex. It's too in the darks, in the shades. So that's why we're facing every single 2 years, we're facing with the new crises, new problems in the stock markets, because there is basically no information and understanding what is actually money, what is being treated as a money, and how we actually can define what it is. Even Greenspan in the 90s, Alan Greenspan said, we cannot control monetary fiscal policy because we don't understand monetary aggregates in the 90s. And it's got even worse since then. So your idea how we democratically evolve, I think, given the level of debt and the complexity of the system, we are done. We are at the end of the peak cycle. And the idea that we move forward with the same speed is, for me, a bit unrealistic.
And Alex, and what does it mean, this de-dollarization of economy? Like, could you explain that in a very simple words that everyone could grasp it? Is it good? Is it bad? Or is it natural evolvement of the system?
I think what, for me, the dollarization of the system, the way it's been treated now, is just laughable. Because everyone who says we're going to switch to yuan and it's going to be like great, I think yesterday the Nabiullina, the head of the central bank of Russia, said the risk of holding reserves in yuan is our extension very big because we don't have any tools to hedge the currency extension. The thing is that we need to understand, and again, we think dollars, America print dollars. No, it's not the way it works. It's the banking system that evolved over the last 60 years that created this mechanism. And dollars was not used because someone wanted it to, because it was, at that time, the largest economy. It had a huge economic power, and it was easier for everyone to transact with it. So even nowadays, 50% of all transactions are done directly in dollars, billed in dollars, right? If these transactions are not billed in dollars, they are probably 95% of all derivative transactions that support global trade are in dollars. So when we say the yuan, now everyone is doing like the trade, like Saudi Arabia does trade with Malaysian local currencies, take whatever it is, India and Malaysia, local currencies, rupees. The overall amount if we take the overall share is about 2 to 3%. So there is a long way to go. All the doomsday saying tomorrow dollar will collapse, it's just a bullshit. It's not possible, because if you want to bet on that, then we're going to go into economic hell worldwide, because then the whole global economy is going to collapse. You don't want to do that. But
Alex, and why don't we just like that sparks the question? Don't trade in Ethereum, because theoretically it could be represented everywhere, and is that even feasible?
I think the problem is that, okay, the problem what we have with the humanity, every time we have a good idea, we will drive it to extreme part, and then when the extreme is reached, we will try to speed up and end up in another extreme, right? So before that, before the current system, we had a gold standard. So the gold standard, the problem with the gold, it's highly inelastic. So the availability of the metal itself dictates how much economic power or how much economic liquidity you can provide in the system, right? So the next stage was when the gold was abandoned, it was created a banking syndicate that was actually dealing in dollars, but there were no dollars, because the bank said, okay, I'll give you the credit because I believe that you have those money. If you don't, you will get it from someone else. That basically created a very elastic system. A credit extension was possible in every single country in the world. So, but after the 90s, the bankers said, okay, where do I make a quick buck? And then we do this financial engineering, then became the first dot-com wave. Then after the dot-com bust, they created another bubble in the real estate, and then the banks collapsed, right? So the system that when the banks were expanding like hell, and this was basically the expansion of banks' balance sheet was, by definition, the reason why the world was so hugely progressing in terms of economic growth. Now, when the banks collapsed and everyone said, okay, this game is actually very, very dangerous, I'm not going to play it, we have a problem that there is no economic growth anymore. And the money creation is not happening. So we're basically, for the last 15 years, we've been going like this. And the only thing that is happening, because money is not being extended to the economy, the only thing is happening that we're creating bubbles in every single financial market. And when this bubble is going to burst, and it's going to burst very soon probably, then we're going to face not a problem of banks or a sector like dot-coms. We're going to face a bubble of global economic debt. So basically, the whole system is going to go under. And the question is only, will it happen very quickly? Then the de-dollarization phase will be happening very quickly, but it's going to be very detrimental to everyone on Earth. Or we're going to go through like a small process. Let's say, for me, the China and Saudi Arabia dealing in their own currency, it's not about they hate dollars. It's about they don't have enough dollars because the banking system is not able to provide enough liquidity. It's just trying to avoid the problems of the current system and finding a new way. And I think Ethereum is simply not there yet because the scale of this cryptocurrency market is currently not there because there is no regulations. Everyone treats them differently. How do you agree on certain terms? And the problem is that the current world, right? If you deal in dollars, you know exactly if you get the dollars, where you can invest it. You can invest in stocks, you can buy bonds, whatever it is, because every single financial asset is based from what is actually doing the US debt, treasuries. Mm-hmm. And we need to transition into a new system that will, and I think it's going to be kind of like an algorithmic cryptocurrency that will be elastic, that will include a lot of factors that will control for the value of the currency. Let's say with the help of AI, we can do the resource base, the amount of population, the productivity. You can actually weight it much more easily. You can create an incentive for very directed investments where the actual economy is and economic growth and economic benefit is going to be produced and not just creating another stock bubble by buying back shares. So I think in that direction we're going to move. And Ethereum actually, with all the changes that has actually happened, made a foundation to be the risk or the asset of which every cryptocurrency risk will be priced. I might be leaning out of the window here a bit, but I think there is, like with proof of stake, and then you have certain changes that have been done through the last 2 years. It has become a deflationary asset. It's attractive in terms of staking, and the staking yield will basically showing if Ethereum is a risk-free asset, the staking yield on this asset will control and will be a reference towards any other staking yields in this ecosystem. But we're simply not there yet, and it will take time.
Well, Alex, I've been using your wise words as an oracle for any of my financial decisions in the last 2 years. So whatever you say, I simply believe, because like the way you talk, and like it just tells me that you're one of the few experts that I know in the financial field that, if I don't trust you, who else should I trust? And to wrap it up, and I have two really important questions. One's about lifestyle. So most of my friends, like especially in the IT community, we've been trying to kind of adapt digital nomading, living in different countries, spending winter here or there. You coming from Estonia, but you calling Berlin your home. What do you think about digital nomad style of living in the perspective of what you just described, like this, dark ages that are coming, and would it be actually make sense? And the second question, you could also wrap it up in the first answer. What would you do? Like, would you buy a small house in the middle of Finland with access to clean water and mushrooms, or like, please tell us what to do.
Okay, let me start from the second question. It's really hard to say to someone what he should do, because it all depends on the lifestyle you want to have, your aversion to risk. For example, I'm not in a phase where I want to live on the outskirts and somewhere in the woods, but I think having a small home somewhere remote is definitely helpful. A lot of very big investors and like legendary guys in the space, they all do have remote locations. They all do have, like your not dad, but your relative. That a lot of guys are real preps. So if you have the financial ability to do that, I would definitely recommend to do that. I think it's a good plan. It doesn't mean that it's happened from today to tomorrow, but it's kind of like I was propagating before the COVID struck, right? I was propagating guys have at least like 3 weeks of food supplies always at home, or like or the toilet paper and all this stuff. And I was laughed at for like 2 years. Then the COVID stroke, the first week, all the toilet paper disappeared, all the products are like the panic. And I said, it's not about like the product, the food is going to disappear, but you don't want to go in this hot phase, like when first 2 weeks, when people are acting mad, you don't want to go and socialize in this environment. So it's just try to avoid it. And there's a lot of like small tricks that you can do to make it sure. I think the idea is where you live is going to be decisive. I ask myself where I want to live and where I should go in case the situation is going to get out of hand a lot, and I don't have the answer. Because there's always like a lot of arguments and a lot of features that you need to consider in order to make that decision. Unless you just you're being thrown out of your own house and you have no choice but to leave. So this is the question that I ask myself a lot, and I think it's personal. If you are capable of, if you like living remote and you like working remote, yes. If you like more driven, if you are young and you want to achieve something and you just need to go in for some economic success, you want to be successful, probably you're not going to avoid being like in a large city when you can networking, where you can meet people and you can do stuff. So I think IT space is a bit different, to be honest. So if you code, I think now with ChatGPT, it's going to be even easier. So probably remote, if it's a way for you, yes, you need just to find a normal employer that accepts it. If you don't want to be, I mean, an option to have an option to go to the office. I myself also work like from home mostly, and sometimes I think a week in the office would be great, just to hang out with the people, have a beer, just to chat or something. It's helpful. So I think the kind of like a mix always does, but it's very personal that direction. But I don't think I mean, apart from that, the huge bubble in the commercial real estate, because according to statistics, like in New York, I think the occupancy rates are currently around 50%, and San Francisco is even less, and we're seeing defaults all over the place. So I think the culture of nomads and home from work is not going away. I think this will lead to another crisis in this commercial real estate because it's also levered. But at the same time, if you have the option, you should choose what to do. I'm as clueless as anyone else. I think if you have the financial power, prepare for the worst. Don't try to invest too much, but be sure that somewhere around your relatives, somewhere around the people you know, I think the dependence on the kind of people you know from your childhood, parents, your relatives, is going to be crucial if something bad happens. And I would look that way rather than which city you want to live in.
Yeah, we're coming down to our basic, human interactions and ability to build network and stay with friends and family. And just to add on, I always say that in times of crisis or before crisis, work out, because the investment in your body and mind is actually the best investment you could make.
Yes.
Alex, I much
also
appreciate your time.
Just one thing, apart from working out, don't forget to drink quality wine, because it's something worth living for. That's what I do after the workout.
I don't know, someone wise say that life is too short to drink a shitty wine.
Yeah, it's on my LinkedIn page as a intro line. Life is too short to drink.
See, good. Then, thanks a lot for joining my soft podcast. I much enjoyed it. And if anyone would like to follow Alex and read more of his blogs and podcasts, I'm going to place links down in the description. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the week.
Thanks, Sergey. Thanks, guys.
Ciao, ciao.